elections since 1994, the results have been quite predictable. The ANC wins with a great majority, and then the opposition shares the little crumbs that are left over. So is that really multi-party democracy? That's the first thing. Is that really competition? That's the second thing. If it's predictable that one party is always going to win, and it seems to be the case all the time, then the last question is, if there's no threat to the ANC's prospects at the polls, then what incentive do they have to actually perform as a governing party?
Of course, it is a multi-party democracy. In South Africa, of course, our very first phase in this multi-party democracy also coincided with the immediate post-liberation point, where we have this massive and very legitimate liberation movement coming into power and really setting out to conquer state power and to consolidate its own power. And in that space, it really became a national movement in power. I often think that in this election, we really see if the voters get such a bargain, they're not just choosing between those parties on the ballot. They also choose between multiple identities for each of the parties on the ballot. When we come to the ANC, we can decide, is it a liberation movement that we want to vote for? Is it a party in government, a state party that we want to vote for? Or is it just one of the competitors in the political arena that we want to vote for? When we get to the GA, the voters can go and decide whether they want to vote for this new and very interestingly multiracial party, or do they want to go and vote for the old nuts that are still sitting in that national party? A real bargain. They can get several things in the EFF. Yes, I guess we can decide whether we want to vote for a real riotous party or a revolutionary party or a mixed bag party. And so, wow, those parties really got it going for them in all directions. The voters can choose which one of those they want to vote for. ANC, it is not under threat at this stage, except at this election, as William also said in his introduction, there is much more of a threat than there had been on previous occasions, especially in as far as the three metros in Gauteng are not necessarily all at stake. Tshwane probably a bit more at stake than the other two, but closer to power shifts or the ANC being pushed under the 50% mark than we had seen so far. And that for the ANC is a certain level of threat, a point it had not been at before. And for me, this is a process, and this is actually the 10th major electoral event, if we count 1995-96 as those interim local government elections as well. And through all these elections, we've seen big moments of uncertainty. Also for the ANC, when after it had failed in its alliance with the National Party in the Western Cape, it actually ceded power. Another great moment of electoral uncertainty was in KwaZulu-Natal, when the ANC took power from the IFP gradually across several elections. But what we see this time around is much more of a threat for the ANC. It is the first time that the ANC possibly stands to lose power in places where it had gradually accumulated and built it up to a certain point, perhaps not as high as in some of the other provinces. So that is, for the ANC, that is a serious level of threat. But interestingly, at this exact time when the ANC experiences the threat, it is also much more of an internal threat that the ANC is experiencing, just to keep those factions together. It's been such a dominant party in power for such an extensive period of time that we also almost see pre-elections that we've seen the last few months before we get to next week's election, where even in places like Tshwane, where it's not that certain that the ANC will retain outright power, although it should still have a good chance to put together a coalition. It has a much better, stronger position of bargaining than the other political parties. if another political party should win power, and there are many more municipalities where power could change than just in the big metros, although those are more spectacular, then it will always, the next big question there will be how to take power over those state institutions with which the ANC has gradually fused with. And I think that stage will be the major one of change, for a test for democracy. How does that level of power handover work? And so this moment of great change, I'm going to close on this point, is that I see it as two tectonic earth plates really moving. The one is the identity politics and liberation politics, and just a little footnote there, and maybe people, if they still vote ANC and talk liberation politics continuously, maybe they are holding opposition parties, and the DA that holds the old nuts, maybe they're holding them to account in the longer duration. And that could also be a form of accountability. But these two earth plates, I think, are moving. We are at that point, on the one hand, much more identity politics, liberation identity, much more racial identity. On the other hand, much more performance-based and making parties own up for corruption, for mismanagement. That is the other earth plate, and much more of that is taking over, but it's a gradual process.